There we were, a group of 18 ex-misfits, the ones who didn't quite make the cut. We all had our reasons for being here, but most of them were just excuses. What we really had in common was the shared weight of regret and frustration, a whole lot of pent-up anger. Morale hit rock bottom when the army decided to mess with our original plans. Instead of sticking to the contracts and training they promised, they reclassified every one of us to fit the needs of the army. And guess what? They were in desperate need of signal support specialists. So, me and about 15 other guys got our orders, packed up, and headed to Fort Gordon for another round of AAT. At least this time, they treated us like prior service. We got our own barracks, had weekends free to go wherever we wanted, and, thankfully, weren't constantly hassled. That said, the barracks were a nightmare. They make my top 5 worst army housing list, without a doubt. The place was a mess, asbestos everywhere. It had been condemned, with all sorts of warning signs plastered around the building. Because of the health risks, they told us not to nail anything into the walls or mess with the drop ceiling, to filter our water, and to limit how much time we spent breathing the air inside. Avoid breathing inside the building? Yeah, that was real comforting. I guess that didn't apply when we were sleeping. Just the usual army nonsense. The rooms were small, 2 people per room, and the beds were packed ridiculously close together. To keep things interesting, I had a small collection on display at the top of my desk, a bit of a running joke. An urn filled with my dog's ashes, a book titled Adolf Hitler, some portraits of random old rednecks, a sword, a deflated sex toy, and a squirrel figurine. Not sure what I was trying to say to anyone who might inspect my room, but I hoped it'd make them as uncomfortable as I felt. Strangely, my 1SG thought it was hilarious, snapping pictures to send to the command team. But that's a story for another day. Anyway, here we were, a bunch of pissed-off soldiers getting through a more technical part of our signal training. Thankfully, we had long lunch breaks, and most of us decided to skip the DFC. Instead, we spent our downtime over in the woods across from the classrooms. What started with a few hammocks quickly spiraled into full-blown construction. We got into the camp vibe, so we dug a fire pit and started building. First up was a treehouse. We chopped down trees, split the wood, and put together rough 2x8s. Then, we found some solid branches 10 feet up and lashed everything together with 550 cord. Once that was done, we moved on to our next project, a tomahawk throwing range. We set up several tree stumps and turned it into a pretty tough course. While we were at it, we threw together some benches around the fire pit. Before long, we had our own little gypsy camp, which we officially dubbed the Shire, and even put up a sign to mark our territory. One afternoon, we decided to go out and grill brats, just kicking back and having a laugh. We did the usual routine, eating, hanging out, and then headed back to class. Everything seemed perfectly normal until the sirens started. The sound cut through the air, sharp and relentless. We noticed the vehicles parked just outside, all too familiar, but now charged with an unsettling urgency. I wonder if someone went down, one of the guys mused. Right then, there was a knock on the door, and an MP signaled for the instructors to step out. One of my classmates peeked out the window. Shit, there's a fire truck. We put the fire out, right? I muttered under my breath. Yeah, man, that thing was buried under sand, came the reply. But the tension kept building. Then we saw him, our first sergeant, standing outside, his face twisted into a storm of anger. Oh, shit, we're screwed, someone said, and a chorus of murmurs followed. The door swung open, and the cadre barked at us. All you 18 X-ray motherfuckers better get the fuck outside and line up. We scrambled out of our seats, filing outside, bracing ourselves for what we assumed would be an intense chewing and maybe some smoke sessions. Across the street, smoke billowed up from the woods. 2 fire trucks were parked, and both the fire chief and our first sergeant were glaring at us, their eyes full of fury. We're screwed, a classmate muttered, and I couldn't help but agree. We formed up, snapping to parade rest. The first sergeant paced in front of us, his eyes locked on each of us like a predator zeroing in on its prey. He looked pissed. No, he looked furious. "I gave you idiots too much slack, and you hung yourselves with it," he growled. "The base commander's on his way. He'll decide your fate." He glared at each of us before turning to have a tense conversation with the fire chief. The guy next to me nudged me. I dared a glance toward the woods. Through the haze, I could see smoldering embers and the firemen working to extinguish the last of the flames. In that moment, it hit me. We weren't just in deep shit. We might actually face jail time. And the fact that the base commander himself was on his way didn't help. The scariest part? We weren't getting smoked. Yet. We waited, nerves tight, and at one point, the smoke drifted our way. One guy started coughing, his discomfort breaking the silence. "Maybe we should move a little," he said, his voice weak. The first sergeant spun around, eyes locked on him like lasers. The rest of us wisely decided to hold our breath in silence. Eventually, an SUV rolled up, and the general, flanked by the command sergeant major, got out. We snapped to attention. The general barely acknowledged us, his focus on the fire chief and the first sergeant. After a quick exchange, the fire chief led them into the woods to show them the damage. As we stood there, I started wondering who would take the fall. My bet was still on Brian, the skinny little asshole. Through the haze, the command team returned, walking slowly in front of us, inspecting every one of us like we were bugs under a microscope. My clothes felt like they were clinging to my skin in the heat. "Men, you've committed an act of arson on federal land and burned a significant amount of protected woodland," the general's voice rang out, clear and stern. "You're in some serious shit." We all braced for the worst. But then, in a surprising twist, the general added, "But that treehouse and tomahawk throwing range? Those were pretty fucking cool." We exchanged glances, confused. "You fucked up, but damn, this is the best thing to happen here in a long time," the general continued, turning to the 1SG. "These are the kinds of warfighters we need in the Signal Corps." "Hoa. Yeah, just try not to start any more fires," the general warned, his tone light as he turned and headed for his SUV. The command team climbed in, and off they went. Our first sergeant stood there, his back to us, eerily still. We didn't move right away. We were all in a state of shock, still convinced we were about to get royally screwed. But even the first sergeant seemed thrown off, confused by the situation. Finally, he turned to face us, shaking his head in disbelief. "You idiots. I can't believe this," he muttered. "But the command team doesn't want to press charges or take any action. I have no idea how the hell you're getting away with this. After class, report to my office." "Roger that, First Sergeant," we all said in unison, still trying to process what just happened. Later that day, after class, we went to the First Sergeant's office, but he was nowhere to be found. Over the next few weeks, he never brought it up again. We kept our distance, naturally. Our cadre had banned us from returning to the woods, forcing us to hang around areas where we could be easily monitored. Not that it mattered much. Some of the new guys messed up anyway, and soon enough, we got our woodland privileges back. Somehow, we'd managed to cause a forest fire on federal land, and nobody gave a damn. No consequences. I still can't believe it. Honestly, sometimes I wonder if I've been stuck in some sort of exhaustion-fueled dream, still waiting for the other shoe to drop. Weeks went by, and nothing happened. It was like the whole forest fire incident had been erased from the record, like it had never happened. The strangest thing was the quiet that followed. You'd expect the kind of tension that leaves a bitter taste in your mouth, but instead, there was this weird sense of relief, like we'd all dodged a bullet. For a while, the story of the Shire, as we dubbed it, became a sort of urban legend around the barracks. Everyone talked about the epic construction project and how we'd somehow managed to burn down part of the federal woods, but more than anything, they talked about how we got away with it. Every time someone new heard the tale, their face would morph into a combination of disbelief and envy, like they'd just learned how to hack the system. But life in the Signal Corps was, as expected, mundane. We spent most of our time hunched over tech gear, running cables, troubleshooting comms, and praying we wouldn't get stuck with some of the more tedious tasks. Signal training might have been a more technical part of the Army, but that didn't stop us from daydreaming about the chaos that might have awaited us if we'd stayed in the infantry. It didn't help that some of the guys started using the term soft to describe what we were doing. Sure, we weren't getting shot at every other day, but there was something about the boredom of the training that gnawed at us. The atmosphere in the barracks had a new edge to it, though. We weren't exactly the most popular group anymore. It wasn't because of the fire or anything like that, it was just that we were those guys. The ones who didn't follow the rules and somehow came out ahead. It made the other soldiers uncomfortable. They couldn't understand how we kept slipping through the cracks. Then came the day everything changed, though none of us could have seen it coming. It started as just another morning of mundane training. A typical droning session in the classroom that left half the guys dozing off and the rest of us checking our AR goggles. I was half tempted to tune out and slip into my own world of augmented reality, where I could hack the system and send myself on a mission far away from the drab walls of Fort Gordon. But just as I was about to jack into my neural link, the door slammed open. "Shit, it's the 1SG, muttered the guy next to me. His voice was laced with dread. It wasn't just the 1SG, though. A few MPs were standing in the doorway, their eyes scanning the room with a strange intensity. They weren't here for a standard barracks inspection. There was something different in the air today. The 1SG wasted no time. "All you 18 X-ray motherfuckers, get your asses outside." "No." We exchanged uneasy glances, but nobody dared protest. We filed out of the classroom and into the parking lot, where the MP vehicles were parked. A few other instructors stood by, murmuring among themselves. Something was definitely off, and the unease in my gut told me we were in for something big. As we assembled, we noticed something even more out of place. There was a civilian van parked in the lot, its windows tinted so dark that it was impossible to see who was inside. But the fact that it was there, the fact that they were here, meant trouble. The 1SG was still pacing, his jaw set like granite. His eyes, though, were no longer filled with just anger. There was a flicker of something else in there, something I couldn't quite place, but I had a sinking feeling I wasn't going to like it. He turned to us, eyes blazing, and spat out, "You guys think you're some sort of untouchable crew, huh? Well, you've got a surprise coming." None of us spoke. The silence was thick, but the air around us was charged with tension. "Listen up," the 1SG growled. "That fire? The one you thought got swept under the rug? It's not over. There's a report, and now the higher-ups are involved. You think you got away with it, but there's a team here to fix that little problem you created." The words hung in the air like a blade, and I felt my stomach twist into a knot. This was bad. This was way worse than anything we had imagined. The civilian van's door slid open with a hiss, and a man stepped out. He was tall, wearing a long coat that seemed out of place for the Georgia heat. His face was hidden behind a pair of augmented sunglasses, and the low hum of a neural implant buzzed faintly from the back of his skull. A specialist, maybe, but the air around him screamed something more. Corporate. The kind of person you didn't want to mess with, not even in a future where everyone seemed to have their hands in someone else's pocket. He stepped forward, and his voice cut through the silence like a blade. "These soldiers," he began, addressing the 1SG, but clearly aiming the words at us, "have made a very costly mistake." I swallowed hard. Costly? The guy didn't pause, his voice growing colder. The fire was an incident. But what happened after? That's a different story. You boys have been marked as a liability, and the higher-ups are giving us the task of cleaning up your mess. That was when the chill truly hit me. My mind raced through all the possibilities, none of them good. Cleaning up our mess? What did that even mean? The 1SG looked like he'd just swallowed a lemon. He glanced at the MP behind him, who nodded and gestured for us to start moving. "Pack it up," the 1SG barked. "You're all on lockdown until we figure this out." We had no choice but to follow orders. As we shuffled into formation, the guy with the augmented glasses shot us one last look, his eyes hidden, but somehow still piercing. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. We were in deeper than we realized, and now it was too late to back out. We spent the next few days in a haze of uncertainty. The reports came in, the paperwork piled up, and the atmosphere in the barracks grew colder. There were whispers, but no clear answers. I knew the fire wasn't going to be the thing that haunted us. It was something else, something worse. It was then that we started noticing things. The briefings were different. There were more civilians around than usual, people in suits who didn't look like they belonged at a military base. The tension was palpable. We were just waiting for the other shoe to drop. And drop it did, just like a lightning strike. That day, when we were called back into formation, the higher-ups weren't here to chew us out. They were here to make us an offer. When the higher-ups finally showed their faces, it wasn't the 1SG who called the shots. It wasn't even the regular officers. No, this time it was that guy with the augmented shades, the one who looked like he'd stepped out of a corporate boardroom instead of a military base. His name, as I would learn later, was Donovan. And let me tell you, he wasn't here to play games. The formation was tight. You could hear the chatter of our boots hitting the ground as we stood in front of the formation. The 1SG was still hovering off to the side, his usual stern look replaced with something darker, something bordering on resignation. It was clear he was out of his depth now. "All right, you misfit toys," Donovan's voice cut through the tense air like a whip crack. "You've been given a chance. A rare opportunity. You don't screw this up, and we might forget all about that little incident in the woods. If not, well, we'll deal with you in ways you can't even imagine." His words hung in the air, a promise laced with a threat. The whole group shifted nervously, and I could feel my skin crawling. I wanted to speak up, to ask what the hell was going on, but something told me that if I opened my mouth, I might not get a chance to close it. "You're being transferred to a new assignment," Donovan continued, scanning each of us with a cold gaze. "No more signal corps training. No more playing nice. You're going somewhere special. Somewhere useful." His words were slow, deliberate, and loaded with implications. I could feel the shift in the room. This wasn't just a punishment, it was something else entirely. "You want to know where?" Donovan asked, his voice low but with an edge that made everyone stand straighter. The tension was unbearable. A dozen eyes shot toward the 1SG, hoping for some kind of answer, some sort of explanation. But he didn't offer any. He couldn't. This wasn't his call anymore. "The where is classified," Donovan said, smirking. "But you'll learn soon enough. Pack your shit. Your lives as you know them are over." We were dismissed, but no one moved right away. Everyone was trying to process what had just happened, and no one wanted to be the first to speak. A dozen heads turned, glances exchanged. This wasn't some run-of-the-mill punishment. This was something more. We didn't get much information over the next few days. Just a lot of strange, cryptic whispers and not a lot of answers. Our instructors gave us one last round of training, but it wasn't like it mattered. The entire base felt different. Like something was on the horizon, but no one knew exactly what. Finally, the day arrived. We were escorted onto a transport shuttle that would take us somewhere else. I didn't know where, and none of us did, but the weight of what was about to happen hung in the air like smoke from the fire we'd started months ago. The shuttle ride was uneventful, but the silence between us was deafening. I could feel the others' unease, their glances flicking between me and the rest of the crew. No one spoke for a long time. I just leaned back against the wall, closing my eyes, trying to tune out the hum of the engines and the murmur of uneasy voices. I was used to tension, used to waiting for something to explode, but this felt different. This felt like we were being set up for something much bigger. Eventually, the shuttle landed. I didn't expect much, but the moment I stepped off that transport, I realized this wasn't just another training facility. This wasn't Fort Gordon anymore. It felt futuristic. The buildings were sleek and metallic, covered in neon lights that flickered in the haze of a toxic sky. The air smelled faintly of ozone and burnt circuitry. We were led into a massive building that looked more like a corporate complex than a military installation. The walls were made of glass, and through them, I could see rows of computers, tech engineers, and high-ranking officers walking with purpose. This was no ordinary base. This was a place for high-end operations. Donovan was right behind us, as stoic as ever. "Welcome to your new home," he said. "You're about to become part of something that's far above your pay grade. It's not going to be easy, but that's exactly why you're here. You'll learn fast or you'll break. It's your choice." We followed him inside, through a set of automatic doors that slid open with a sharp hiss. The walls were lined with screens flashing technical data, futuristic tech, HUDs, digital blueprints that seemed to dance and shift in real time. This place was nothing like anything I'd ever seen. It was like stepping into the future. The air was cooler, sterile. It reminded me of some high-tech corporation's secret lab. Our group shuffled through the hallways, still reeling from the shock of the past few days, but more questions were building in my mind. What the hell was going on? Why were we chosen for this? What had we gotten ourselves into? We were finally brought into a large briefing room where an officer stood at attention beside a massive holographic screen. It displayed a series of images, dark, glowing cityscapes, blimps hovering above neon-lit streets, and what looked like combat zones under the cover of night. This wasn't just a military facility. This was something else entirely. I could feel it in the air. The officer at the front of the room spoke, his voice amplified by the tech that filled the room. "Gentlemen, you've been selected for a special project. You're about to embark on a mission that will take you into the heart of a war zone. But this isn't your typical deployment. This mission has one objective: retrieve. Retrieve what? That was the question on all of our minds. But the officer didn't wait for us to ask. Retrieve sensitive information. It's not just about surviving. It's about gathering intel from the enemy. We're going in, and we're going in hard. Think of this as your initiation into a whole new world of warfare, one that you've never even dreamed of." I swallowed hard, the weight of what he was saying finally sinking in. This wasn't just about Signal Corps anymore. This wasn't even about being soldiers. We were about to become something else entirely. Something more dangerous. I glanced around at the other guys. No one looked at me like they had any answers. We were all just waiting for the next step. And I had a feeling that step was going to change everything. The officer's words rang in my head long after he finished speaking. Retrieving intel. Those words echoed like a battle cry in the depths of my mind. This wasn't just another mission. This was going to be a different kind of war, one that involved more than just bullets and bombs. It was about information, control, and something much larger than any of us could understand right now. The briefing room was quiet. Everyone was staring at the holographic display, which now showed a series of coordinates, mapped out across the world. The officer swiped his hand across the air, and the map zoomed in, showing a dense urban environment under the glow of neon signs and towering skyscrapers. "This," he said, gesturing to the hologram, "is our target. A city controlled by a corporation that's been running under the radar for years. They've been using their influence to gather sensitive data, sell it to the highest bidder, and manipulate governments worldwide. Your mission? Get in. Get the data. Get out." I could feel the tension building. A part of me wanted to laugh, thinking back to my days at Fort Gordon, slinging mortars and surviving firefights. This was different. This wasn't about combat. This was about infiltration, about blending into a system that was so far removed from anything I'd ever known. The kind of system I couldn't even begin to comprehend. "And how are we supposed to get in?" someone from the back of the room asked, breaking the silence. It was Brian, the skinny guy who always had a sarcastic quip on hand. The officer didn't flinch. "That's where the fun starts," he said. "You've all been chosen for a reason. You'll be augmented, cybernetically enhanced. You'll have access to technology that will make your mission possible. And the clock's ticking. You have 36 hours to infiltrate the city, retrieve the intel, and extract. You will not fail." He tapped a button, and a small panel slid open, revealing a set of sleek, futuristic gear. There were neural interfaces, sleek black armor, and what looked like high-tech rifles, their sleek barrels shimmering under the fluorescent light. A few of us stepped forward, eyes wide, as the officer continued. "These are your tools. The neural implants will enhance your cognitive abilities, connect you directly to the system. The suits will adapt to your environment, providing tactical advantages. And these," he pointed to the rifles, "will ensure that you can defend yourself if things go south. You're not just infiltrators anymore. You're ghost operatives." Ghost operatives? The term sent a chill through my spine. This was real. This wasn't some glorified field exercise. This was a mission to tear down the walls of a corporation, to dismantle an empire from within. I walked over to the gear, my hand hovering over the sleek, polished rifle. I could feel the hum of power beneath the surface, the potential of the weapon ready to unleash at a moment's notice. The armor was lightweight but durable, made of materials I couldn't even begin to identify. The helmet was embedded with tech that made my head feel lighter as I put it on, and I felt a sharp, invasive sensation as the neural implant made contact with the base of my skull. The integration was instant. My thoughts, my senses, my entire body felt connected to the technology. This was it. This was the beginning of something new. "Get suited up," the officer barked. "You'll be leaving in 2 hours." 2 hours. It wasn't enough time to process everything, but it was all we had. I could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on me, the gravity of what we were about to do sinking in. This wasn't just about the mission anymore. It was about everything I'd ever believed in: the army, the training, the camaraderie. It was all about to be put to the test. We were led to a holding area, where our packs were ready, our augmented suits primed for action. It was surreal, the kind of surreal that only happens when you're about to step into something far bigger than yourself. The transport arrived with little fanfare, a black, stealthy vehicle that hummed softly as it moved. Inside, the crew was silent. No one spoke, no one dared to speak. The only sound was the steady hum of the engines as we were whisked away, faster than I could comprehend. The city was coming closer, and the weight of the operation was too heavy to ignore. It wasn't long before the vehicle came to a stop in an abandoned alleyway just outside the city's boundaries. The sky was dark, covered with smog and the faint glow of neon lights from the distant skyscrapers. The streets were empty, save for the flicker of advertisements on the walls, trying to convince you to buy something you didn't need. I stepped out of the transport, my boots hitting the cracked concrete. The helmet's HUD flickered to life, feeding me a constant stream of data, enemy locations, local power grids, surveillance cameras. My neural implant was synced with the system, and I could feel the information coursing through me. It was like having an extra set of eyes, a second brain. "Stick to the plan," Donovan's voice came through my earpiece. "And remember, this is a covert operation. If you make a single mistake, it's over. We're not here to make noise. We're here to take down an empire." We moved as one, a team of highly trained, heavily augmented soldiers, now more than human. We were shadows in the night, slipping past security checkpoints and hidden cameras, dodging the patrols that wandered the empty streets. Our mission was simple in theory: get the intel, but the complexity of the city and the dangers lurking in every corner made it anything but easy. We found our way to the heart of the corporate district, a massive complex surrounded by walls and security systems that could track every movement. This was the place we needed to infiltrate. The digital blueprints we'd been given were glitchy, but the neural implants helped us bypass some of the more difficult security measures. It was slow going, but we were used to waiting, used to being patient when the stakes were high. The deeper we went, the darker it got. The walls seemed to close in, the hum of the city fading into a distant memory. This was a place where shadows thrived, where secrets were buried deep beneath layers of tech and corruption. And as we moved further into the building, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. We were getting closer to something, but I didn't know what. And then, just as we breached the final level, the system went silent. The lights flickered. The hum of power that had sustained the city stopped. A cold feeling spread through my chest. "Something's wrong," I muttered, but I wasn't sure if I was speaking to anyone in particular. The door ahead slid open with a hiss. And that's when I saw it. The first clue that this mission was about to go sideways. Something was waiting for us inside.